and introduce myself. My name is Zach and Betty Mendez. I'm with the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. Behind the scenes, I also have Alana Miller here. She's going to be monitoring the Q&A box as we go along, and she'll kind of she'll stop me if there's anything that I need to clarify as we walk through this presentation that it seems folks are asking questions about or didn't understand, and then any kind of larger questions we'll kind of save until the end. We're here today to talk about Denver's Transportation Demand Management Program, TDM, and the new regulation that the program is bringing forward to City Council for approval. So just a quick agenda for today. We'll talk again and cover what TDM is, why TDM is important, the planning process for this regulation, the regulation itself, and then how this fits into the development review process. As I mentioned before, please utilize that Q&A box on your screen to ask questions and provide any comments that you have. Again, Alana will kind of flag if there's anything that I may have not explained clearly enough that folks are having trouble understanding. And then, at the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session and answer any unanswered questions at that point in time. We are recording this meeting. Let me just make sure that that's true and that it did start recording. Yes, it did. It is recording. So if you know any colleagues that would benefit from hearing this presentation, please, we'll have this posted on our webpage, which we'll give you at the end of the presentation pretty shortly here after this meeting, so you can share that with them. Please utilize that so we can make sure that the development community is getting this information and it doesn't come as a surprise once the regulation is in place. All right, so what is TDM? So the city defines TDM as strategies that shift the how, when, or where of people's travel behavior to better increase our system efficiency, reducing the occupancy of vehicle trips, and achieve specific planning goals. And so, these graphs over here to the right really show, these are from the Mayor's Mobility Action Plan, which show our current, well, not current, a few years ago, but this is still probably pretty relevant, commute mode in the city of Denver, about 72% drive alone, and where we're trying to go, which is 50% drive alone. The city of Denver is growing, we all know that, and we have a lot more people utilizing our roadways. And so if we're able to kind of distribute folks better across that transportation spectrum, then we can better and more efficiently use the infrastructure that we have. And this TDM requirement that we'll talk through has been recommended by several plans that have recently come out by the city. So Blueprint Denver does make a recommendation for a TDM regulation, as does the comprehensive plan. It's also mentioned in Denver's Transit, the Mayor's Mobility Action Plan. And then as CPD goes through their neighborhood planning initiative processes, I know TDM is being worked into those as well through the community input. So I can't say that far northeast has TDM in there. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I do know for sure East and East Central had mentions of TDM regulations and strategies in there. And then, West is currently going through the process. I've seen it come up there as well. That is, is still going through the process, still to be adopted later this year, I believe, or go through the adoption process. But it's coming up a lot as a tool in our toolbox to help better utilize our transportation system across the city. And so what do TDM strategies look like? We have this nice little graphic here that shows all the range of things that TDM strategies can be. Anywhere from actual services where you're providing, you're buying up an RTD service or a flex ride, or it could be providing a shuttle to a transit station. But it can also be other things like providing car share parking or preferential parking for carpools, offering transit passes at a discount to tenants. It could even be education, right? Welcome kits that tell people where the nearest transit options are, where the nearest bike share station is, all of those kinds of things. So it's really a wide range of strategies that TDM can be. But what does that look like on the ground? These are some examples of what that could look like. Again, secure bike parking, carpool parking, a transit screen, subsidized passes or an eco pass. It could even mean bringing up a transit shelter outside of development to have actual shelter and not just be a stick in the ground. So folks have somewhere dry to wait. And why TDM? I mean, I think I touched on this earlier, but TDM is really important to help us utilize our existing transportation infrastructure more efficiently. So this image shows how 40 people moving down a street, if they're all in their cars, if they're all on a bus, and then if they're all on a bicycle. And you can see how much space each one of those uses up. And this image is not to say that everyone needs to cram on a bus or everyone needs to fill the bike lanes, but if we're able to better distribute what we currently have, which is mostly everyone in their cars, if we're able to better distribute that across the spectrum, even to modes that aren't even pictured here, we can better utilize that existing infrastructure that we have in place. And folks have already been doing this work across the country, across the Denver area. There's other cities nationwide that have TDM regulations in place. The ones that I hear about most frequently are areas around Washington, D.C., as well as Seattle, but there's many other regulations across the country. But there's also organizations locally working on TDM. So the Transportation Management Associations, also called TMAs or TMOs sometimes. You may be familiar with these groups. You can see they're listed here on this map. These are folks who represent these geographic areas that are shown here that are already doing TDM work. They're, NUTC sets up bike libraries, Transportation Solutions already is working with developers to work TDM into their developments. So these folks are already well established in the community in doing the TDM work. And I wanted to mention these folks specifically because I actually talked to them this morning. We have a really good working relationship with them. They, of course, this is their world, TDM, so they're excited to see this regulation, and they're also very ready and willing to help developments as they come in, whether you need assistance with planning or implementation. These folks are a good resource if you are developing in the area that they represent. So just wanted to throw that out there. We can have more information on our website because these are great partners to have in this program. So I'll touch briefly on the planning process just to remind folks of where this has been, and then we'll move into the regulation. So this process was initiated in the fall of 2018. Soon thereafter, we conducted focus groups. Some of you, I'm not sure who all is on the call. I can't pull that up yet. But some of you may have been involved in one of those focus groups. We had focus groups for developers, RTD. We had one with the TMAs. We had one with shared mobility providers, right? So like the lifts and the lift scooters and the birds and the, all those different companies that do the scooters and the bikes. We had several other focus groups, but we met with various groups individually before we had planned out anything, and said the city is moving forward with a regulation that will require TDM. Help us understand how that could work for you, because we don't want to kind of bring a hammer down without any input. So we were really looking for input, and we got a lot of great input. We took that input, we took data and information from other cities who have done TDM regulations and started drafting those into concepts over the spring of 2019. And then in the summer, we had a stakeholder meeting where the stakeholder meeting was made up of several folks from those focus groups. So several developers did come to that stakeholder meeting as well, to kind of look at the draft concepts and tell us if we had heard them or we didn't hear them, and how, just how things were looking. We also started engaging city council at that point. And as you can see here, we just kept moving through, working with our partner agencies. We provided an update to the Land Use and Transportation Committee of Council. That's what LUTI is. Apologies for that acronym. And then in fall of 2019, we also held a developer forum and webinar. So many of you, I think I used the same distribution list as I did for that one. So many of you, if you didn't attend, you may have seen those emails around that time to invite you to come hear about the progress we had made and the kind of where we were at that point in time. And then since then, it's been a lot of finalization, coordination, drafting things up. Obviously with COVID last year, kind of slowed things down just a tad, but we're kind of back on track now. And we're currently in the process of finalizing the ordinance and rules and regulations that will kind of govern this regulation, developing a tool, which I'll talk to you all about here in a few minutes, and then conducting these rounds of outreach. So where we've been, where we are. Now the regulation. So this TDM regulation will be citywide for all new development that is subject to the site plan or the LDR process. So every site plan that comes in will need to have a TDM plan in place. For the LDRs, if any of you have gone through that process, there's kind of an iterative phase where you bring it to CPD and they talk about what would be required to be submitted in order to get you to the site plan stage, is my understanding. And so what we'll do with the LDR is we'll kind of use that stage where CPD is formulating the correct direction for that large project to go, and understand if it's better for the LDR to maybe consider a TDM strategy, or if it's okay to defer it to the site plan process. Every LDR is different. I attended my first LDR meeting a couple of weeks ago, and it's a wide array of things. There could be one large warehouse that just happens to meet the thresholds of the LDR requirement, but then there's also projects like Stadium District, if any of you are familiar with that, where there will be multiple projects and multiple phases, and that's an LDR too. So we want to make sure that we're being flexible with folks, and that folks are potentially able to leverage those larger developments to implement some TDM if that's desired, but also just ensuring that folks are complying with the regulation of the site plan phase. As I mentioned before, this will be implemented using an ordinance and rules and regulations. So how this works is the ordinance will come first. I'll let you know if you see the ordinance kind of posted on City Council website or anything like that. It's pretty light. There's not much to it because a lot of the meat of the regulation falls into those rules and regulations. So the ordinance will allow DOTI and CPD to jointly create rules and regulations regarding TDM requirements. And this allows us to be a little more nimble with in the rules and regulations. We can be a little more nimble in responding to the market. I always use the example in this case of scooters, right? Like none of us knew those were coming. All of a sudden one day they were just dropped on our streets, and then they were everywhere, and they kind of changed how folks got around the city. And so if all of this lived in an ordinance, it would take quite a long time to change that. And move through the processes. The rules and regulations, there's still process to it, to updating it. We can't just update it as we please. There's rules about how you update those, but they can be a little more nimble in responding to those sorts of things. Also, admittedly, right, there's not many cities in the Denver metro area. Well, there's no cities in the Denver metro area, and not many in Colorado. There may be a couple that have done TDM regulations. And so we want to be able to respond to things that we may have gotten wrong in the rules and regulations. And you'll see later on that, we have leniency in the rules and regulations, so you're not getting penalized for something we got wrong. And we want to be able to update those as we, in the rules and regulations as we move through and we learn more information. But the whole premise of that ordinance and rules and regulations is to have developments achieve a specified single occupancy vehicle, SOV rate. And so how that works is there's a base SOV rate, right? So we have the data from the latest American Community Survey through the census that tells us, what we did is we pulled it by each of these neighborhood contexts from the blueprint plan. So we know, okay, in an urban setting, right, these light teal areas, I don't know what that color is, light tealish areas, we can expect to see 70%, I don't know off the top of my head, but we could expect to see 70% SOV rates just based on how things currently are. And then based on what we think is achievable, what we think based on data, right, that's important, is achievable to achieve through TDM strategies, you are now required to get to 65%. And you get to that 65% by picking TDM strategies. We'll have a menu for folks, but if folks are familiar with TDM and you've done TDM elsewhere and you want to propose something that's not in the menu, we're very flexible with that as well. But you pick enough strategies to get that 5% difference between the base and your goal, and that's your TDM plan. That goal SOV rate will vary by the type of development that you're building. So you can see at the bottom there, office, commercial, industrial, residential. By your development size, so you can also see how that fits into the tiers in this chart at the bottom of the screen. Your location in the city, so that's these blueprint contexts. So the suburban, urban edge, all that good stuff. And then you also your proximity to transit options, and we're defining that as high frequency transit. And I believe we'll use or we are using the definition that's in the Denver zoning code. So we're not creating anything new. It's just the Denver zoning code definition. And so, we thought it was very important to not have a one size fits all approach to this, because an office development downtown is going to be a lot different than retail development in Green Valley Ranch or something like that. So it does make it a little bit complicated. I've mentioned the tool before. We'll get into the tool in a minute here. We're creating a tool to help guide you through that, so you don't have to have 500 charts next to each other to figure out where you land. You just need to provide us some information in the spreadsheet, and it will tell you what your goal is and what your base is. So hopefully that'll be easy for folks. But we did think it was really important to kind of have these variations and not have a one size fits all. And I just want to highlight, I know I've talked about it before, but these, down here at the bottom, you can see the different land use contexts and then the different tiers and what size developments fit into those tiers. I can switch back and forth between the next slide and this one so we get an understanding of what we're looking at and just refresh. But these are the requirements that fall within each tier. So tier 0, those, again, let me switch back. These are these smaller properties here. Those have no requirements. So those are too small. They have too little impact on the transportation system. They don't have enough revenue to keep a program, a TDM program and strategies, moving throughout the years. And so currently those are essentially exempt, if you will, from this TDM ordinance. They don't have any requirements. For tier 1, I'll switch back here so we can remind ourselves of what those thresholds are for tier 1. Those properties will be required to implement TDM infrastructure. So I've mentioned a menu of strategies, and on that menu, there will be strategies that are listed as either programmatic or infrastructure. And infrastructure is exactly what it sounds like, things that are built into the development. So that could be, secured bike parking, that can be a transit screen, it could be a shower and locker room for bike commuters. It's a range of things, but infrastructure based, built into the development. A transportation coordinator is required for those tier 1 properties. This does not need to be a new full-time position that you have to hire within each new development. If you have a property management company that manages all these properties, there can be kind of one person. You could use a TMA if you'd like, one of those organizations that I had mentioned earlier. They were willing to do that when I had talked to them earlier. You can be sort of creative with that. We just need it to be someone that the city knows they can contact, who is familiar with the TDM plan that is approved for that property. And then of course we encourage memberships with our TMAs. If you happen to be constructing within a TMA boundary, those organizations, most of them have been around for years, decades even, and are well versed in implementing TDM strategies, making sure that they're effective, making sure you're able to meet your goals. I think they're really good resources. For tier 2, those are a little bit larger properties. Let me switch back here. Oops. Sorry. There we go. So reminder, these are those larger properties, if you will, mentioned here. So tier 2 has all the same requirements, but there's an added element of you need to have infrastructure and a programmatic strategy. So programmatic strategies are things that, I guess are not built into the development, right? So think about things like a subsidized transit pass or an eco pass, credits to use the scooters or e-bikes that are around the city, things like that. So that's the added requirement for those larger properties. Other than that, everything else is the same. The infrastructure, the coordinator, we encourage membership of the TMAs again. In terms of monitoring, both Tier 1 and Tier 2 properties are required an annual report. So this report should be pretty easy. We don't need you to write an essay to us. I think what we'll probably have is actually just a standardized form for folks, just so we're getting in kind of consistent information, and you're not reporting information that we didn't need or not reporting information that we did need, and just kind of eliminating a lot of that back and forth. But essentially what we want to know is your TDM, is your transportation coordinator the same? Please update that contact information with us if necessary. And then we just want to make sure that all of your TDM strategies that are in your approved TDM plan are still implemented, accessible, being utilized by your tenants, so that you haven't, taken out the bike racks or, anything like that. Tier 2 has an added requirement of a survey every 2 years. This was something that was actually pretty consistent, I believe, from other cities that have TDM requirements. And how this will work is, again, the city will provide you with a standardized template. So you don't have to go and make your own survey. We will have that available for you. And I will also have some guidance on how to get, decent input on that survey. And essentially what we're measuring through that survey is, are you achieving that designated SOV rate that we talked about earlier? Are your TDM strategies working? And then in terms of compliance down at the bottom here, I think in the beginning it's pretty simple. If you don't submit a TDM plan with your site plan, you won't get approval on your site plan. It's a necessary document to accompany your site plan. If you don't install what you said you're going to on your TDM plan and your site plan, right, no certificate of occupancy, no different than anything else if you build anything not according to the plans that you provide to the city. So no CO there. If you forget to provide an annual report or an incomplete one, we'll remind you of your obligations, right? We're all human. Sometimes we forget that it's already March or whatever the case may be. We'll remind you and give you 60 days to comply. If you don't comply after that, then it will be escalated into the administrative citation process. And then for Tier 2, this SOV rate, if you're failing to achieve that SOV rate, we have implemented a tiered approach. So you won't all, like the first year you don't meet the SOV rate, you're getting slapped on the wrist. We don't want to do that. We have a tiered approach, and it's really focused on resolution, right? The purpose of this regulation is not to be a new revenue stream for the city to bring in a whole bunch of money. The point is to help us utilize our roadways more efficiently and get folks using other modes of transportation if they're able to, and encouraged to. And so the approach is really focused on resolution. I'm just realizing that I don't actually have the approach laid out here, but I'll step through it really quickly. So if after 2 years after you build, you are doing the survey, you fail to meet this SOV rate, essentially we just require you to talk to us or to a TMA and find some remedy. So we'll kind of analyze how you're implementing the program and see if there was, you should be marketing it better. Maybe that strategy doesn't work for you. You could swap it out. Things like that, right? That's really the requirement there, is to meet with us and come up with some sort of remedy to help you achieve your SOV rate. If 2 years later you don't achieve that SOV rate again, we'll require you to revisit your TDM plan, swap out a strategy that clearly isn't working, or add a strategy if you think, if we think that that's what's needed. If 2 years after that you're still not achieving your goals, then we will have you meet with the city or a TMA again to see if you are, there's anything that you could, kind of do differently. And then 2 years after that, right, so 8 years after construction, if you're still not meeting your goals, then it would move to the admin citation process. So I think the hope there is that at one of those 3 steps before the admin citation process, that we would be able to help you get back on the right path. I think an important thing to note here is that if there are less than 3 other properties in your area, in your same blueprint context, that are also not meeting their goals, then this doesn't, the enforcement structure that I just talked about doesn't apply, because then that suggests that we have one of our numbers wrong or some of our numbers wrong, which, to be perfectly honest, is possible, right? We are working on the best data that we have from other communities that have done TDM based on the census data that we have. But as you all know, some of that's not perfect. And so we've done the best that we can to make sure we have the best numbers, but it's possible nationwide this strategy works really well for everyone, and for whatever reason in Denver it doesn't work, and there's not a way for us to know that until it doesn't work and we see it with our own eyes. And so we won't enforce if there are lots of other folks who are not also achieving their goals. And then we'll also be very flexible with folks. So we know that properties change hands, and sometimes tenants can change over time, and essentially you can change your TDM plan at any time you'd like. So if you have a tenant and you have transit passes and that works well, and then that tenant moves out and you have a bike shop move in, well, transit passes might not work so well for the bike folks, but some bike measurement will, or some bike strategy will. And so we'll be really flexible. You just bring it through us. It would have to be approved by Dottie, but we want to be really flexible with folks. Again, the purpose of this is not to just penalize folks, just to penalize folks. We really want this to help us achieve the citywide goals, utilize our system more efficiently, be able to move people more efficiently throughout the city.
Hey, Zach, we have a couple questions in the Q&A here.
Okay.
So first, can you talk about how mixed-use development fits in here?
Yeah, so essentially it's like a proportion-based system. I'm really hoping that I can explain this clearly. So we'll just use the numbers on the screen, right? So you're coming in with 25,000 square feet of commercial and 25 dwelling units. No, this isn't going to work for an explanation. It's proportion based. So you basically take the proportion of non-residential that you have to residential and compare it to these tiers. Alana, can you help me explain this? It's difficult to explain, but it makes sense when you see it on paper.
That's right. It's proportional based on the size of your development and type of use that it will be.
Right.
And the tool that we're developing will help walk you through that as well.
It will, yeah. Yep. So yeah, it's proportional, basically exactly to these tiers. So if you have like 12,500 square feet of commercial and 13 units, then you would hit tier 1, if that makes sense.
And then another question just about, are there specific amounts of requirements? Like how much infrastructure are you building? How do you decide, is it one bike rack? What does that look like?
Yeah, maybe I kept talking about the tool and then I realized I never explained it. So maybe this is a good time to talk about the tool, which will lead into that conversation. So we are developing a tool right now in which there is some information that you'll have to provide to the system, like your blueprint context, but there are resources on our website that we will point you to make sure that you are able to figure that out. So you enter the information, how much commercial you're developing, how many residential units you're developing, where in the city you're developing. There's a couple of other inputs that you have, and then the system will essentially work through all these variables and tell you what your base rate is and your goal rate is. And then, we have a consultant helping us create this, so I haven't seen it yet, but what I would imagine is you would move to like the next tab in the spreadsheet, and it would bring over your base and your goal SOV rates, and then have that menu of options, menu of TDM strategies there for you. We'll have explanations about how each of them works, so you know what you're getting into. And then each one of those, based on the data that we have, has a reduction tied to it. So if you have a 5% reduction and you just need to do infrastructure, depending on what you choose, you could pick one infrastructure item that maybe gets you that whole 5%. Or you pick 5 infrastructure items that each get you 1%, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, each strategy will have a reduction tied to it, and then that's how you bring that base rate down to that goal rate. To answer the question, Alana, do you think?
Yep, I think so. So one more question here. If the development is within a metro district that does a lot of this on a broader scale, can the development rely on those strategies since it is already paying taxes to support those programs and infrastructure?
Yeah, definitely, right? If there are essentially TDM strategies that are being kind of offered to a whole metro district, I think we would just need some sort of verification that you fall within that metro district and what they're providing, and then we would apply the appropriate reductions. But yeah, absolutely, we don't want to make you provide a shuttle if someone else is already providing a shuttle for you, or I don't know, not everyone has to provide a shuttle, but just for an example. Yeah, and please, if there are things like that, we'll have the email address for the program at the end, and you can email us. As you're moving forward with the development in that metro district, feel free to email us and ask those questions. But yeah, you should be able to use those, definitely.
Those are all the questions I see right now.
Okay. We'll talk through the development review process, and I think there's a couple more slides after that, and then we can talk about or do a Q&A for any other questions that come in. So one of the big things that we heard when we were doing the focus groups, let me go back for a second, when we were doing the focus groups and the stakeholder groups was that our development review process is that it was desired that we don't kind of lengthen that or add more complication to it, which is definitely understood. And so I think, please definitely sound off in the Q&A if you don't agree with me, but I think this actually fits very well into our existing development review process. What I have outlined here is just like a typical site plan process. And essentially it doesn't create any extra steps. The only extra thing that comes into play is just you need to provide that, that PDF or that printout of that TDM plan from the spreadsheet that we talked about. I guess I forgot to mention that too. There will be probably like a third tab or maybe that menu tab that you would be able to print onto an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper or print a PDF and then just submit that with your site plan submittal. And so that's really the only extra step, is just that extra paper that goes with the submittal. Otherwise, everything else just flows through the process as normal, right? You submit, CPD distributes it for review to all the agencies, including DOTI development review team. And that's who will review the TDM plan. And as long as you're meeting that, as long as you're hitting that reduction, then it should be a pretty easy process. Like the site plan might go through multiple reviews, but hopefully that TDM plan is pretty shored up within one review or two, potentially, if there's something that, happens. And then it's approved as part of, the site plan transportation review, and you have your approval, right? This log is on the back end. It doesn't delay your approval. It's just kind of like essentially me making sure that we're kind of putting everything that is subject to the TDM plan in a log, so we know kind of what to look out for when COs are coming in, and all that good stuff. But I think this fits very well into the existing plan. It's just an extra thing that you have to submit, but no extra process, no separate review. It just goes right in. And then on the back end, right, you construct your building. When you request your inspection, the only thing that they're going to be inspecting for is those TDM infrastructure things, strategies. So that shouldn't be anything out of normal or out of the ordinary for a developer, right? It would be things that are noted on your site plan and your building permit set that need to be built, and the CPD inspectors would just, or potentially DOTI, I think it's going to be a CPD though, will just, if you said you were going to build showers and locker rooms and the shower and locker rooms aren't there, you're not going to get a CO, right? That's pretty standard. But then you just, assuming that you've built everything to code or to your building permit set, then you get your CO. And then on the back end is kind of where things get complicated, but not complicated, but just there's the extra steps there, but they don't delay your inspection, they don't delay your CO. It's just back end things. So the back end things are verification of those programmatic strategies. at least 6 months, like within 6 months after you get a CO, we want to see that you have a contract with RTD to offer eco passes, or whatever programmatic strategy you've chosen. We need to see some evidence of that. It doesn't need to be at CO, right? Because that doesn't make sense. But we need to see it within 6 months. And then the monitoring and enforcement, which I talked through, then is kind of like the post-occupancy things that are still in play. But again, those kind of don't delay your review or your construction and your CO. So I don't know. I think this fits very well into the existing process. Again, let me know if you don't agree, and we can definitely kind of take a look at that. But that's how it fits into the existing process. Quick timeline for you, and then there's just one more slide after this, which is the Q&A, I guess. So later this month, the ordinance will begin to move through the city council process. So that'll be happening later this month. It's been finalized. Again, the ordinance is really light. So if you see it on a LUDI agenda or the city council agenda, and you're like, why is this only 2 pages? Just remember that the bulk of this ordinance is happening in those rules and regulations. And those rules and regulations you'll see in March go through their own adoption process that has a public meeting as well. So there's input opportunities at both those junctions. Later this month, we'll have a kind of a part 2 of this webinar, potentially early March, but we're really trying to target the end of this month. And we'll walk you through that tool that we've been talking about, that spreadsheet tool, and show you how to use it, how it creates your TDM plan, and just make sure folks are getting familiar with how that works. I kind of jumped ahead and said the rules and regulations will go through their adoption process in March. Again, there's like a posting requirement with that and a public meeting requirement. So you should be aware of that. We'll make sure that things are updated on our website, which I'll show you at the next slide. But the anticipated start date for this regulation is April 1st. That's what we're aiming for. So April 1, 8 a.m. or whatever, whenever the building CPD opens, 7 a.m. maybe. All site plans at that point need to start having TDM plans included. So you can see here is our website, just a short bit.ly link, bit.ly/DenverTDM. And then our email, super simple, tdm@denvergov.org. Feel free to send any questions there. The website will be updated with the recording of this presentation, as well as dates of city council and LUDI, and kind of all the things that the ordinance and the rules and regulations will move through as soon as we're aware of those dates. We'll keep that updated. And with that, Alana, are there any questions? Or please feel free to put questions in the chat box.
There are not currently any questions, but I'm sure we should just hold for a second.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, cool. You put the link in the chat. That's perfect. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention for those, everyone's super good, is if there's any other ways that we can get this information out to the development community, please let us know, either in this chat or if you want to think about it for a minute, email us at this TDM inbox. But we don't want this to be a surprise for folks. We want to try to get this in front of as many developers as possible, so it's not a surprise on April 1st if we get to that, our anticipated start date, that people are like, wait, I have to submit a what? TDM what? So please let us know if there are organizations, newsletters, like anything really, that you know of that would help get this in front of more developers, just so, and not even just developers, right? I think I keep saying developers, but I think, when I say developers, I really am talking about the whole development community, right? Because there's architects and engineers that have to fit these things into their plans, and there's other folks involved than just like a developer. But the development team, anyone who is on those development teams who could benefit from this information, if you know a way to kind of get in front of them, that would be greatly appreciated.